The stagecoach creaked to a halt beneath a sky the color of smoke and old parchment. Dust swirled around the wooden wheels like ghosts too restless to settle. Clara Belle Dawson stepped down, her boots touching the cracked earth with a hesitation that came not from fear, but from too many years of being unwelcome. She smoothed her skirt, patched carefully in places no one might see, and adjusted the bonnet that shielded her prematurely silvered hair. It was not vanity, but protection from the sun, from the years, from being looked at too closely. She scanned the small crowd gathered near the general store. Faces, some curious, some hard, others merely indifferent. She looked for one in particular, the face she had memorized from a daguerreotype, smudged with thumbprints and hope. There he was, Harlan Briggs, his stance wide, his suit stiff, his mustache combed to perfection. She had imagined their meeting 100 different ways. None of them began like this, his eyes sliding past her, down her body, and narrowing. He didn't smile. Not really. "You Clara?" he asked. She nodded, and her voice came out soft. "Yes, Clara Belle Dawson." He offered a hand, quick and loose, as if giving something he meant to take back. "You look," his eyes flicked her face. "Older than expected." The words didn't sting. They throbbed. She lowered her eyes, not in shame, but because she knew better than to meet a man's disappointment head-on. He gestured to her trunk and turned to walk away. The inn was modest, its whitewash peeling like sunburnt skin. Clara was led to a room upstairs by Mrs. Ida Mae Penrose, who looked her up and down like one might inspect a used quilt at market. She smiled, but her voice carried vinegar beneath the sweetness. "Thought Harlan was getting himself a young miss," she said with a chuckle. "You're not what we expected." Clara smiled faintly. "I often am." The room was small but clean. A single window let in a square of gold and dust. She set her valise down gently, as if the air might break it. Later that evening, she stood in the corner of the saloon while the men laughed loud enough to shake the walls. Her hands clutched her shawl like it might unravel if she let go. Harlan hadn't invited her, but he hadn't said she shouldn't come either. He was drinking, heavily. When his eyes met hers across the room, he did not soften. Instead, he threw his arm around a younger woman's waist, bright-eyed, red-lipped, her bodice tighter than the air in Clara's lungs. "This here's what a man expects when he orders a wife," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room froze. Laughter paused, then shifted. A crueler kind. Clara turned quietly, walked out into the night where the stars didn't blink and the cold wind didn't care. Her shoes crunched gravel with every step back to the inn, each sound louder than the last, until the silence between them was unbearable. She didn't cry. Not until she was upstairs, where the light from the oil lamp caught the curve of her cheek and held it like a lover might have, once. She opened the small leather journal she carried always, the one that held scraps of poems, unsent letters, dreams she no longer shared aloud. She wrote, "He looked through me, like I was glass. That once held wine, but now holds only dust." The pen paused. Her hand shook. Is age a fault? Or simply, a story men refused to read? A knock came, sudden and soft. She opened the door to find a boy, no older than 12, standing there. His clothes were too small, his eyes too big. He didn't speak, just held out a slice of apple pie, still warm. She knelt to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" He pointed to his chest, then to his lips, shook his head. No voice. She smiled. "Tucker, that's what they call you, isn't it?" He nodded. She took the pie with a reverence that made it holy. "Thank you, Tucker." He offered a shy smile, then darted away like a rabbit spooked by thunder. She closed the door and sat at the small table by the window. The pie tasted of cinnamon and quiet mercy. Outside, the wind shifted. Something was moving. Days passed. Clara kept to herself. She swept the inn porch, helped with laundry, baked biscuits in the morning when Mrs. Penrose allowed. The townfolk called her Miss Dawson, with clipped politeness. Some offered small nods. Most did not. Harlan did not come by, not even to return the ribbon she'd included in the last letter. She didn't expect him to. On the 5th morning, while hanging linens to dry, she saw him again. Across the street, arm in arm with the red-lipped girl. He caught Clara's eye and looked away. Not cruelly, just as if she no longer existed. Clara turned back to the linens. The sheet in her hands flapped like a sail torn loose from its mast. That evening, as twilight stretched long across the dirt roads, she walked alone past the churchyard. The bell tower cast its shadow wide, across her chest. And then, footsteps, heavy but measured. She turned. The sheriff. He removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said simply. "Evenin', Sheriff," she replied. He didn't smile, just looked at her with something unreadable. Not pity, not desire, something deeper, something still forming. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said. Clara shook her head. "I'm not." He tilted his head, curious. "It's better to be seen clearly and cast aside," she said softly, "than to be held falsely and broken slowly." A silence. Then the faintest nod. Respect, not pity. He turned to go but paused. "Light's fading," he said. "Take this." He handed her a lantern. The flame flickered gently, caught between wind and glass. She held it like it was the only warm thing in the world. As he walked away, his boots clicking steady on the wooden boardwalk, she stood bathed in amber light, dust rising around her like ash. That night, she wrote again. They came for the bride, but left the woman. She slept with the lantern burning, and from the window across the street, a man watched her light glowing through the dark, not with desire, but with something slower. Recognition. The morning after the lantern night broke soft and gold, brushing the windowsill where Clara sat peeling apples. Her hands moved by instinct, not urgency, the blade's rhythm a quiet heartbeat in the still and kitchen. Mrs. Penrose bustled behind her, clattering pans with a kind of irritation that didn't require speech. Clara didn't mind. The silence suited her better than kindness feigned. By the third apple, the door creaked open, and a small shape paused in the threshold. Tucker, barefoot, hair tousled with sleep. He held out something clutched tight in his fist. She dried her hands and knelt to meet him. Slowly, he unfurled his fingers. A single daisy, slightly crushed but still breathing yellow. "For me?" she whispered. He nodded, solemn. She tucked it behind her ear, where it trembled gently with every breath she took. "Thank you." He grinned, wide and wordless, and disappeared into the stables. The days folded into one another like linen sheets, sun-bleached and quiet. Clara worked without needing to be asked. She sewed a ripped curtain, patched a loose stairboard, reorganized the pantry. Small things no one noticed until they stopped creaking or sagging. Mrs. Penrose said little, but one afternoon, as Clara scrubbed a skillet with her sleeves rolled up, she muttered, "You got strong hands for a woman past marrying." Clara smiled faintly, kept scrubbing. The town kept its distance. Men nodded from their horses. Women looked quickly away, some with pity, some with calculation. She wasn't competition. She wasn't inspiration. She was a puzzle no one cared to solve. She began walking at dusk, long, quiet loops past the mercantile, the livery, the church. The lantern Eli had given her hung on her porch now, always lit by nightfall. Not for him, not exactly, but something in her refused to let it go dark. She first saw him again near the edge of the dry creek. He was fixing a busted fence post, sleeves rolled high, brow dark with sweat and dust. A hammer swung steady in his calloused hand. She didn't call out, just paused a moment too long, watching. He looked up, caught her, and nodded once. "Evenin'. Need help?" she asked, surprising herself. He considered. Could use another set of hands. She tied her shawl tighter and walked toward him. They worked in tandem, no wasted words. She held the rail while he drove the nail. When the sun dipped behind the ridge and the air cooled, they sat on overturned crates and passed a flask between them. Not whiskey, just coffee, bitter and warm. He drank first, wiped the rim with his sleeve, and handed it to her. "You always fix what's not yours?" he asked. Clara took a sip. "Only if it's quiet while I do it." He chuckled, low and short. The first real sound he'd made beyond duty. "I read once that mending is just love made visible," she said. "You read a lot?" "When I can. I like the words that don't try too hard." He nodded. "My wife, she was always underlining things in books. said it helped her remember. There it was, the past tense. Clara looked down at her hands. I do that too. When they stood to go, he lifted a small horseshoe from his coat pocket, rusted and worn. He handed it to her without ceremony. Found it near the post. Thought you might like it. She took it gently, as if it might crumble. I do. After that, he came around more. Never lingering. Never presuming. Just there. Fixing a shutter, carrying in firewood, drinking her coffee in shared silence. He watched her with eyes that didn't take, but witnessed. One afternoon, Clara found a folded scrap of paper tucked into the slat of the bench outside the inn. Her own handwriting. One of the poems she thought she'd lost. One she'd tucked in a tree near the ridge. Some hearts grow roots in exile, turning their silence into bloom. Beneath her words, in blockier script, was a single reply. Some silence is a garden, not a grave. Her hand trembled as she held it. That night, Eli stopped by with a cracked lantern glass he asked her to help replace. She let him inside without a word. They worked side by lamplight, the air filled with that electric stillness just before the first drops of rain. When the glass was fitted and the wick trimmed, he lit it, and the light glowed soft and full. He didn't speak, neither did she. But when she looked up, his gaze was already there, not intense, not hungry, just quiet, steady. The kind of looking that doesn't burn but warms. The kind that says, I see you exactly as you are. And that was more dangerous than desire. It made her ache with the possibility of being known. The next day, Harlan reappeared at the general store. Clara saw him before he saw her, but when he did, he gave a crooked smile, all show and varnish. Clara Bell, he drawled, tipping his hat. Still here. She smiled politely. Still standing. You know, I was just telling the boys, it takes a certain kind of woman to linger where she wasn't wanted. A strong one, she said, her voice even. He laughed, not kindly. Or a desperate one. The store fell silent. Eyes turned. Before Clara could speak, Eli stepped forward. His tone was low, calm, and devastating. She stayed, he said, because this town didn't break her. That's more than I can say for some men born in it. The air grew still. Even the dust seemed to listen. Clara met Harlan's eyes and gave him the smallest nod of dismissal. It was not cruel. It was final. Outside, she stood in the light and breathed deeply. Tucker ran up to her and pointed to the porch, another daisy, nestled where her hand would land. When she turned, Eli was walking away, his shoulders squared, his stride quiet. She didn't call after him, but she picked up the daisy and smiled, slowly, like something blooming after long frost. The first frost came silent and sure, lacing the rooftops in thin silver and turning morning breath to ghost clouds. Clara watched it from her window, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of chicory coffee. The daisy Tucker had left her head brown and dried, still pinned beside the door. She hadn't moved it. Let time do what it would. By now, the town had stopped whispering about her. Not because they'd accepted her, but because they no longer needed to. She had become a fixture, like the lamppost near the smithy or the creaky board outside the church. Familiar, unbothered. She smiled at their silence. It gave her space to grow. Eli came by each morning now, not with announcements or tasks, but with a presence that filled the edges of the day like light filtering through lace. They spoke in gestures, him handing her a book someone had left behind in the old schoolhouse, her mending the seam on his coat without asking. They rarely named what was building between them, perhaps afraid it might vanish if said aloud. Some things were too delicate to be spoken. One evening, as twilight softened the world into hush, Clara found herself walking past the empty corral behind the old stable. The sun dipped low, burning peach and gold. She paused at the fence, remembering her father's voice from long ago, saying the trick to handling horses was never to rush. Let them come to you. She heard boots behind her. Didn't think you'd still be out, Eli said, his voice carrying the worn beauty of gravel and years. I don't sleep much before the stars come out, she replied, not turning. He joined her at the fence. They stood side by side, silent but not alone. My wife, he said after a while, died in spring. 2 years ago now. Fever took her in less than a week. Clara nodded. I had a sister like that. Summer fever. She coughed once and was gone. He looked at her then. You ever loved someone? She met his eyes. Once. He left for war. Never came back. Or maybe he did, but not to me. The quiet stretched between them, thick as syrup. Sometimes, he said, I still set the table for two without thinking. She placed her hand gently over his on the fence rail. Sometimes I still pack two handkerchiefs. They didn't look at each other again that night, but something settled between them. An unspoken vow, more real than any word. The next morning, Tucker burst into the inn kitchen with eyes wide and arms flailing. He gripped Clara's sleeve, motioning wildly toward the edge of town. Slow down, child, she said gently. What is it? Him flames, smoke, panic. Eli, the sheriff's office. She didn't think. Just grabbed her shawl and ran, skirts flying, boots striking gravel like gunfire. The fire wasn't in the office. It was in the livery, but it licked dangerously close. Eli and two others fought the blaze with wet burlap sacks, but the wind was fierce and fast, turning sparks into embers, embers into terror. The horses screamed. Clara didn't stop to ask. She found the water pails and joined the line. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, but she stayed, passing bucket after bucket until the flames relented, curling back like a scolded dog. Eli found her as dawn broke, face streaked with soot, hair wild, and eyes furious with life. You could have been hurt, he said. So could you, she answered. They stood chest to chest, breathing hard. He reached up, gently wiped a smear of ash from her cheek. His hand lingered, unsure. I've seen brave women before, he said, voice low, reverent, but never one who made it look like grace. I'm not graceful, she whispered, just tired of hiding. The sun broke over the ridge then, sudden and fierce, lighting the town in amber. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but she saw it in his eyes, the promise of someday. That night, Mrs. Penrose brought her tea without asking, set it on the table, and stood there a long time. You've changed this place, she said, voice tight. Changed me too, though I won't say it twice. Clara smiled. Once is plenty. By the week's end, the town had shifted. Small things. More doors left open. People nodded without suspicion. Clara even caught Harlan watching her one morning as she pinned laundry. Not with longing, but something like apology. She nodded once, then turned away. Let the wind take that moment. On the last Sunday before snow, the church bell rang out longer than usual. A wedding, people said, someone from the next town over. Clara wore her best shawl and stood in the back pew, alone but not lonely. When the music started, Eli slipped in beside her, not speaking, just offering his arm. She took it without hesitation. They didn't watch the bride. They watched the light through the stained glass. Watched how it moved across the pews, spilling red and gold onto the worn floorboards like blessings. As they stepped outside, the first snow began to fall light, hesitant, full of hush. Eli turned to her, finally speaking what had long lived in his eyes. I was never looking for a second chance. But you feel like something I never deserved and somehow still found. Clara looked up at him, snow catching in her lashes. We aren't second chances, she said softly. We're what comes after the storm clears. The part worth surviving for. He leaned in then, slow and careful like drawing breath before him, and kissed her, gently, reverently, as if she were something sacred and not yet fully his. And in that moment, Clarabelle Dawson was no longer the mail-order bride who arrived too late or too old. She was the woman who stayed, the woman who dared to bloom.